What's up, everybody? Welcome to Monday. It is the NBA Strategy Show. He is Greg Ehrenberg, otherwise known as Tinder Lake. I'm Adam Kaufman. Great to be with you here as we look ahead to tonight's 7-game slate in the association. But first, how was the weekend, buddy?
Not too bad. Hung out with my brothers, hung out with my dad. That was pretty much it. Just pretty relaxing, nothing too exciting. So it was good.
So you weren't just glued to the track and watching the cars go round and round and round?
No, I don't care about that at all. I know, like I was talking to Jordan about, it, but he was bemused by it. Now all of a sudden he's a closet NASCAR fan. He's telling me, he's like, "Oh, don't tell anybody, but I like NASCAR." Now I was like, "All right, I guess I'll keep it between us. No
Nothing
big deal."
To be ashamed of, Jordan. It's a very popular sport worldwide.
Yeah, not where we're from though. You know, like I think it's a thing where if you live like below the Mason-Dixon line, everybody like it's just accepted you like NASCAR. But if you live anywhere above it, it's like totally taboo.
Yeah, not a big deal in the Northeast, but I'll tell you what, if you've ever had the opportunity, you get the opportunity, if you're in the South and you can go to, just go to a track, go to a race, so it doesn't even have to be a Daytona 500. It doesn't have to be a big deal race when, we get back to normal life and out of the pandemic and you can do such things. Just the tailgate in and of itself, great time, worth it. Really fun.
Is it any different than going to a tailgate at like a football game or anything? Like what's
so
different?
Much different.
How?
So much different. Just in terms of the clientele and the demographic, so much different. Football game tailgating is nothing like NASCAR or Indy racing tailgating. You got a whole new level of crazy at those events, which I'm here for. I am here for, baby. It's a great time.
Like Bills fan crazy?
Bills fan crazy, but like that's like the bar, and then it goes above.
I'll never go to one, but I'm going to take your word for it.
Yeah, no, you should. You should. All right. Well, let's jump ahead and get your comments, your questions in, obviously. YouTube, the Awesemo Premium Slack channel, whatever you're thinking as far as tonight's slate, questions that you have. And as we always tell you, it is important to know that, you can put a dummy lineup in right now if you want to, but things are going to change, and they are going to change immensely over the course of the next 8-9 hours. They always do. Surprise guys get ruled out, or you just have the typical guys that are questionable, and eventually they will either play or not play, and then value presents itself. So don't lock yourself into anything that we say right now, because again, later on with the programming on the Awesemo channel, that will update you on everything that is happening. That being said, just big picture thoughts going into tonight. Do you have any?
Yeah, so I think this is like most slates I always talk about. This is going to be another probably really strong slate for late swapping, because we have for the Clippers, Kawhi Leonard's status is up in the air. He missed yesterday's game. Paul George's status is up in the air. He's been out for the last few games, and there hasn't really been a recent update on him, but it seems he's questionable to play tonight. So if one of those guys plays and the other one sits, they're going to become a really strong play. If both of them are out, there's probably going to be a bunch of value plays that open up. We could be looking at Lou Williams as a really strong play. He went off last night, but it's another thing where at least at this point in the day, we don't know what the situation is going to be. However, it looks like there's going to be good plays from that game. And it stands to reason that with guys likely questionable heading into lock, just the field is not going to want to play a lot of those Clippers guys if we don't have definitive information early in the day. So that is going to be the key to this slate, in my opinion.
Some of the top plays from our guy, Alex Baker, Awesemo, of course, just taking a look at what we've got. James Harden, Bradley Beal, Steph Curry, Joel Embiid, Domantas Sabonis, Kyrie Irving, Zach LaVine, Julius Randle. I mean, typical names that we're used to discussing here. Who do you like most?
Yeah, it's hard to not like James Harden the most as a pay-up option on this slate. Kevin Durant is out again for the Nets. Obviously, last week he was dealing with COVID issues. Now this week he has a hamstring injury. I'm not exactly sure when he hurt the hamstring, but he's out for at least 2 games. And with him out, we're going to have to see James Harden play a bigger role again. He's going to have the ball in his hands a bunch. There's going to be a usage bump. He had some big games without Durant last week. And now we also have a situation where they have a really good matchup. They're playing against the Kings. The Kings are towards the bottom of the league in defensive efficiency. The game also has a very, very high 239 point total. The next highest total on the slate is 228 between the Rockets and Wizards. So, we're looking at over 10 points difference in total between this game and the game with the next highest total. So James Harden usage bump in a really good game environment. He's going to be a guy that we're going to want to play in cash games, and is certainly going to be a primary target in tournaments as well.
Some in the chat not nervous about Kawhi, believe he's going to be out there, just a rest issue. So again, that's a game, the Clippers, obviously, that we will get to a little bit later on. We remind you, hit the like, hit the subscribe button here on the Awesemo YouTube page. We appreciate you. You want to keep up with all of our shows, DFS offerings, giveaways, whole bunch more. And once you subscribe, hit that notification button. You can get alerts when our shows go live. It's a busy day ahead here as well. This is far from the only show here. Even on a holiday, you will be kept very busy throughout the course of your Awesemo YouTube day. So do stay tuned with us. But first game, as we jump into this 7-game slate, you've got Chicago at Indiana. These are two fairly mediocre teams. In fact, that would probably be a compliment to the Bulls at this stage. And you always have Zach Levine. He is always appealing, obviously. And I'll go through some of the better options on, projection side from Alex. But what stands out to you first for the Bulls?
Not much. So we have Wendell Carter Jr. is questionable to play. I'm kind of surprised that he's even listed as questionable because when he first injured the quad, they were expecting him to be out through the end of March. And now all of a sudden, out of nowhere, really no kind of reporting ahead of time. All of a sudden, Wendell Carter Jr. listed as questionable on the injury report. I think he's more likely to sit than he is to play just because the timeline is so out of whack with what we knew before this injury report came out. So even if he plays, I think it's going to be limited minutes. If he's out, though, it doesn't really create any value because guys like Thad Young, Patrick Williams, they've all been priced up already for the situation that Wendell Carter Jr. is out because he's been out for such an extended period of time. So if he plays, it just makes it really easy to avoid all of the bodies in the Bulls front court. As for other guys, Zach Levine is somebody who typically has a lot of upside. But if we look at the context of this slate, particularly starting with the FanDuel pricing, Zach Levine is 9,600, but then we have Bradley Beal at 9,800 against the Rockets and likely no Russell Westbrook in that game. So Bradley Beal is a much better option on the high end. Then we also have James Harden, who is only $1,000 more expensive than Zach Levine. He's a much better play on the high end because of Kevin Durant being out. So Zach Levine is just going to kind of get pinched out of my lineups in both FanDuel and DraftKings for that reason. He's at 9,200 on DraftKings because there are other guys that I'd rather pay up for than him on this slate. James Harden, 10,700 on DraftKings. And then we could actually roster Bradley Beal for a less expensive price tag on DK than Zach Levine. So you just kind of compare him to the guys who are priced around him, and he's not a priority play.
He is projected anyway for 5x value. We refer all the time to the Awesemo tools. You want to obviously get the Awesemo Plus subscription, weekly pass. More than that, whatever, just try it out. You could try just the NBA if you'd like to, and you can get a look at, DraftKings, for instance. Zach Levine is, Greg said, $9,200 projected for almost 5.5x times value, or 5.1 anyway, right around 48 points, according to Alex. So that's, one guy to think about, as Greg said, even if you want to view more appealing options as, better ways to build your lineup, that's totally fine. You could pay down a little bit here on this side. Kobe White, Patrick Williams. Probably don't want to go to the likes of Thomas Satoransky, Thaddeus Young, even Garrett Temple. But what about those other couple of guys, Williams and White?
Yeah, so the issue here with Patrick Williams, like I said before, is if Wendell Carter Jr. is going to play, then the minutes of Patrick Williams are going to be directly impacted by that. So Wendell Carter Jr. potentially coming back, that could mean Patrick Williams moves back to the bench. It could also mean that Patrick Williams plays less minutes. Those are definitely both things that I'd expect. They still have Otto Porter out, Lauri Markkanen's still out. But even with that, Wendell Carter Jr. coming back into the mix potentially, that would impact the minutes of everybody in the front court.
All right, let's go to the Indiana side of things. Remember, get your questions in YouTube, Awesemo Premium Slack channel, whatever you're wondering pertaining to these games. Now, there are certainly some options that, stand out here. Whether or not they stand out enough on a 7-game slate, that's for you to determine. But Domantas Sabonis, who is certainly a good option, projected for right around 50 points. You have Malcolm Brogdon, who's always in that same conversation, the pay down option at roughly $1,500 cheaper, depending on the site that you're looking at. And he's a guy that is always capable of exploding. Maybe doesn't have the same consistency as a Sabonis, but is a good play. There's Miles Turner as well, who's having himself a good year. Doug McDermott, who's coming off a great game. Who do you like here?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to get away from Domantas Sabonis, who the price has come up a little bit, but he's been priced incorrectly for a little while now. The price has gotten back up to 9,100, but still, I don't think that's quite enough. Like you said, project for nearly 50 fantasy points by Alex. He's going to be somebody that I'm going to get exposure to on both FanDuel and DraftKings. The initial builds I did, I got to him around 20% on both sites. So he's going to be the guy that I primarily want to target from Indiana. The other thing we really need to pay attention to here is Doug McDermott is questionable to play. And McDermott has played a pretty significant role for the Pacers over the last handful of games. He's been starting for them. And if you look at his playing time in the last 2 games, 30 minutes against the Pistons and 37 minutes last game against the Hawks. So if he's out, that's a whole lot of playing time to fill. And I assume that it's probably not all going to go to one guy, except TJ McConnell, who's been playing a bigger role recently. He's somebody who could pick up a couple extra minutes. The guy that I'd be looking at the most in that situation would be Jeremy Lamb. I think that he would have to play a pretty significant amount of minutes, and he's always been a good points per minute fantasy producer in the past. And then Justin Holiday, somebody else who would probably have to pick up a couple extra minutes in place of Doug McDermott. So if McDermott's in, then I don't really think any of these wing players make for strong plays. But two guys that I am going to be looking at to get exposure to in tournaments would be Jeremy Lamb and Justin Holiday if Doug McDermott is not able to play.
Brian says, aloha, Kaufman and Greg, Team Awesemo. Brian, aloha. Thanks for watching. Eric says, our own EMAC, is Adam wearing a Snuggie? It kind of fits that way, right? You can go all Wilson from Home Improvement, pull this up, stay, hood up, stay warm. It's a really comfy sweatshirt, Greg. You got to try one of these.
Is that how Snuggies work? I thought Snuggies were like blankets.
I mean, I'm no expert. I just know that it's important to me to stay warm at all times. The blood temperature, it runs thin, runs cold. I'm cold all the time. Just the heat is blasting here in the basement. It's wonderful. Not so great for the electric bill, but it's wonderful.
Let me just, before we move on, let me touch on Malcolm Brogdon, who it's been weird for Brogdon as of late because his usage is still up. He just cannot make shots right now. He's been ridiculously inefficient from the field, and it's something that has to change sooner rather than later. If you look at his shots from the last few games, 5 of 13 from the field, 8 of 19, 5 of 17, 7 of 20, 6 of 15, 5 of 17. So we're looking at a guy who's shooting below 40% from the field in basically all of his games as of late, but the usage is still there. The usage is still over 25% over the last couple of weeks. So eventually those shots are going to fall, and Brogdon's price tag has come down a little bit from where it was earlier. So Brogdon, who is currently projected for sub 20% ownership on both FanDuel and DraftKings, he's somebody that I have a little bit of interest in. He's not going to be a primary play for me, but eventually those shots have to fall. There's such a large sample size on Brogdon being a high efficiency guard that it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense what's going on with him right now. I'd be more concerned if the usage wasn't there and it was causing him to stop shooting. But since it's not deterring him, the peripheral stats are still there and he's still getting his shots up. Eventually he's going to see some positive regression. They're going to fall and he's going to make for a good value. His price has come down by a little over $1,000 on both FanDuel and DraftKings from where it was at 3 weeks ago. So I think he makes for a nice little buy low play.
Staying with that, there are multiple times recently, I guess the last 2-3 Pacers games where, I'm looking at it middle of the day, get closer to the slate and, using Fantasy Cruncher, whatever it may be, lineup builder and putting together optimal lineups. And a lot of the time, Sabonis and Brogdon are both showing up in there, at least one of the top options. And as we know, you can build out 100 lineups on Fantasy Cruncher and the number 1 versus number 100 are separated by like 2 points. So there are a lot of different directions you could go in, but many times I'm seeing Brogdon and Sabonis both in an optimal lineup. And I don't know, that's something that sort of, I get scared away from that a lot of the time. Just maybe it's a lack of trust and faith in Brogdon like you're talking about. And sometimes it's just, looking at those two together, it's not the same as if I don't know, put a lineup together that has Kyrie and KD or Harden and KD or whatever two of them are available, obviously, in a given night. So how do you feel about putting these two together, at least in the case of tonight where their salaries are still a little bit cheaper?
Yeah, it's not a priority for me on this slate to play them together. Sabonis is somebody I'm going to get to with some regularity, but Brogdon is going to be in my player pool, but not a priority play. And the difference with getting to these guys in the same lineups like a week ago, say, is that we had Sabonis as cheap as 8,300, and he still has a favorable price tag at 9,100, but there's a big difference between 8,300 and 9,100. And it's a little bit harder for both of them to have big games relative to their salaries when we have Sabonis priced over 9K.
We get Curtis, who starts if Dougie McBucket sits, and are they good value?
Yeah, if McDermott's out, I assume that they would go to, let me look at the depth chart really quick. I assume that it would be Jeremy Lamb moving back into the starting lineup. Jeremy Lamb, I'm pretty sure, I'm just going to check, has not been starting as of late. So yeah, the last 2 games, we had Doug McDermott start over Jeremy Lamb, except before that, we had Doug McDermott coming off the bench and Jeremy Lamb had started something like 8 or 9 games in a row. So I think we just go right back to seeing Jeremy Lamb play the same role that he played before. And his numbers as a starter, I'll pull them up really quick, his splits. Um, Here. So when Jeremy Lamb started this season, he was playing 25 minutes per game, and that was only amounting to 22 DraftKings points. However, if Doug McDermott is out and he goes back in the starting lineup, we have to assume he's going to play more than the 25 minutes he was averaging as a starter because there's so many Doug McDermott minutes to allocate to the rest of the rotation. So without Doug McDermott, I would anticipate Jeremy Lamb playing right around 30 minutes. And if that's the case, that would make him a good play. But if he's coming off the bench and McDermott's healthy, then not somebody we have to consider.
The right pick says he is fading Brogdon, says his McConnell lineups have been his best lineups. And there are a couple other people saying that same thing.
Yeah, McConnell's been great lately. The difference between him now versus where he was a few weeks ago is just salary related. So I know that he's ended up on the optimal lineup on FanDuel a few times recently, but he is now priced at 5,900, whereas TJ McConnell a week ago was priced at 4,600. So there's a big difference between rostering McConnell at 5,900 versus rostering at 4,600. He's somebody else who would probably pick up extra playing time if Doug McDermott isn't able to play. But at least at the 5,900 price tag, he's not a priority play for me. TJ McConnell, also some of the other numbers about him that I don't consider to be sustainable. Look at the last game. He had 12 assists, 4 steals, and 2 blocks. The game before that, he had 2 steals and a block also. So there's been some really high defensive stats for him that I don't think are going to carry over. The assists also, I'd have to look at his potential assist numbers, but I have to assume that when you're getting 29 minutes of TJ McConnell, he has to have an insane amount of luck to pick up 12 assists. Like it just has to be every pass he throws, somebody catches it and makes the shot afterwards. So I would prefer to roster TJ McConnell when his price is down as opposed to when it's all the way up right now. And even though he was really good last game, if you look at some of his other recent games, 27, 20, 35, 29, 32 fantasy points, those are all really good results when he's priced at 46 or 5,200, but they're kind of just fair results when he's priced at 5,900. And that's kind of been stealing games for him because I don't expect him to continue to get like 6 steals and blocks.
Folks, hit that like button. We're closing in on 100. Smash away. We appreciate you. And let's tell you about our sponsor, No House Advantage, taking a different spin on daily fantasy sports by offering player prop contests across the NBA, MLB, NFL, obviously, when that season is going, and PGA, all for cash prizes. This exclusively peer-to-peer fantasy sports platform levels the playing field, makes it easier for you to win real cash as compared with your traditional DFS sites. Best part, you can join for free today. You heard me. Join for free today. Won't cost you a cent. Download the No House Advantage app. Sign up using promo code Awesemo and get $25 in free play without having to deposit even a single dime. That's it. Beat your friends, not the house, and win big with player props today. A lot of fun. Certainly, we encourage that you do it. And again, hit that like, get your questions in, all the good stuff here on YouTube and the Awesemo Premium Slack channel. So a lot of good talk on the Pacers side of things, and keep that coming. We'll circle back if we need to, but in the interest of time here with you until 11 Eastern, let's go on to the next game. That is Houston at Washington. And beginning on the Houston side, John Wall, great spot for him, projected 6x value, very similar for DeMarcus Cousins. These two guys projected at 35 plus fantasy points. In fact, Wall closer to 50. You've got Eric Gordon, Jayshawn Tate, also in good spots. Daniel House is in a solid spot. You could pay down PJ Tucker, David Nwaba. Is this one of those games that stands out for you as a value opportunity?
Yeah, and on both sides of the game. This is, if you're looking to stack a game, this would be the one to target. From the Houston side of the game, Victor Oladipo's out, and then obviously Christian Wood also remains out. John Wall is probably my favorite overall play on the slate right now, at least in the initial builds I did. He's the player I'm getting the most exposure to. People are going to want to roster him just because it's a revenge game, and that's the narrative of him going up against the Wizards. What I like about him is that it's just a good spot because Victor Oladipo's out. So that means that we're going to see John Wall see increased usage when he's on the court. The other thing to consider also is that John Wall, who was on a minutes restriction for a little while this year, no longer the case for him. The last 3 games, he's played 35 minutes, 36, and 31 minutes. So we have him in a positive matchup going up against the Wizards, increased usage due to injuries. So everything lines up for John Wall to be one of the top plays on the slate. It's a little annoying to me that people are just going to roster him because he's playing against his former team and just kind of fall into him being a really good play. But I mean, everything lines up for him to have a really good night. Everything is perfect for him.
How do you feel about the revenge narrative in this game? Either side, obviously. I mean, you got Wall, you got Westbrook on the other side.
Well, I don't think Westbrook plays tonight, so I don't think it's
Okay.
I don't think it's going to be
So you don't have to worry
relevant.
about him, is what you're saying?
No, it's so. I mean, if he plays, then I'll have to. I don't care about revenge in general. I did a study on a couple years ago, and basically, when players go up against their old team, it has no impact on their fantasy output over the long haul. So there's going to be individual games where people play better than they normally do, but there's also games where people play worse than they normally do. But over the long period of time, you could expect people to just average whatever their average fantasy production is going up against a former team. So it doesn't mean there aren't.
How wide-ranging was that study? Like, was it on just revenge narratives? Was it all narratives? Do you like birthday narratives? Or are you just a guy who does not like to walk along narrative street in general?
No, so it was literally just every player over the course of a full season playing against the team they used to play for and what their fantasy production was as compared to their average fantasy production. And it just made no difference. So it doesn't mean that individual players don't care. Like, I'm sure there are some players who are like, hey, I'm playing against my former team, I'm going to take more shots than normal. Except it's usually a story that's written itself after the game is over. So like Jimmy Butler played a game against the Timberwolves when he first got traded from there, and this was like 3 years ago or something. And everybody assumed, oh, this is going to be a great revenge spot for Jimmy Butler. And they ended up taking like 6 shots over the course of the entire game. And then people just forget about that game going forward. And the next time that somebody has a big game against their former team, people go, oh, revenge narrative. Everybody wants to play well against their former team. But the reality is that these are professional athletes, and they're generally always trying hard. Right? There's only so much effort. There's only so much effort to give. So there isn't a spot where if you're playing as hard as you can against the Hornets and then you play against your former team the next day, there isn't like 120% effort to give. So with that in mind, that's probably why it doesn't matter over the long haul. I'm sure there are individual players who it's like, oh, I'm going to take extra shots because I'm playing against my former team. Except it's not predictive before the event happens. It's only something we could rewrite the story on after it happens. Then there's other times where somebody plays bad against a former team and somebody's like, oh, he was nervous going against his former team. But it's just kind of natural variance in production and box scores.
Yeah, I mean, there's of course what you're saying makes total sense, and there are always going to be isolated cases. I'm just curious if you are a guy that ever subscribes to narratives in general, whether it's, I mean, clearly it's not the revenge narrative, but whether it's, the birthday narrative, the going home narrative, the, like Giannis on Greek appreciation night in a random city narrative, like stuff that we have, celebrated over the years for people that just enjoy narrative street, which I do. And I'm not saying it drives how I build a lineup. I just enjoy the talking point. I like it, but is it something that, we have El Negro Loco or someone in the chat had just said, I caught it with the corner of my eye, saying like, imagine building a lineup around, a narrative. Is it something you just totally ignore?
I buy into the narrative of Victor Oladipo's out, therefore John Wall gets extra usage. Like that's something that I could actually apply numbers to. If it's just other stuff, like I don't know, like what if it's like Luka Doncic is playing in Miami and it's his 21st birthday last year? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or did he just get shit-faced the night before and now he's hungover playing? Like I don't know. It could be a good thing or a bad thing when it's somebody's birthday. I don't know. Like I could see somebody definitely being hungover for a game. I could see, I don't know. It's not something I could apply.
Don't play James Harden in cities with good strip clubs narrative.
Exactly, and that was a very important Reddit study that somebody did. But I mean, other than that, no, it's really hard to apply actual numbers and have that change of projection because a lot of it's noise, and I assume a lot of the players aren't even aware those things are going on.
Yeah, makes sense. Anything else you want to cover on the Houston side, obviously, before we move on?
Yeah, Eric Gordon, he's also a good play. He's going to have to play extra minutes with Victor Oladipo out. We've seen him step up in recent games. I have no clue what to make of DeMarcus Cousins' minutes. The recent games, his playing time has been down, except the Rockets are also not playing in competitive games. The last 3 games, they lost by 29 to the Pelicans. He was terrible, by the way. Also, that was a revenge game spot for DeMarcus Cousins. The game after they played against the Heat, he played 25 minutes, and that was only a 7-point game. However, they also got down big in the fourth quarter, and they needed to get a bunch of shooting on the court to get themselves back into the game. And then last game, he only played 22 minutes, except they lost to the Knicks by 22 points. So I'm just not sure if this game is competitive. Are we going to see DeMarcus Cousins get back to around 30 minutes as a starter? Or is just the plan now where it's like, hey, DeMarcus Cousins isn't playing very well. We don't want to give him a lot of minutes. And I can't tell what it is based on the results of the last 3 games. Because he generally hasn't played well. His minutes have been down, except the games have also been so non-competitive that we're not seeing starters on the court in the fourth quarter. So I gave DeMarcus Cousins 26 minutes for now. that makes him a good play, except there's such a wide range of outcomes here that DeMarcus Cousins could play 20 minutes and could be a bad play. He could also play 32 minutes and be one of the best center plays on the slate. I have no real good handle on his playing time, but that also based on his points per minute production, he's one of the higher upside centers on the slate. So he's definitely somebody I want to get GPP exposure to, but wide range of outcomes and not somebody I want to be overly invested in and wouldn't feel super confident with in the cash games either.
Swaggy P says, I am not touching Cousins for any reason at all.
Yeah, I mean, I understand not feeling comfortable with him because, like I said, I have no clue what to expect from his minutes today. The range of outcomes is somewhere from like 20 minutes to 32.
Some also mention a few people in the chat. You kind of highlighted this already that John Wall just too cheap to ignore. He's a guy you got to get in tonight.
Yeah, and like I said, it's not that he's playing against his former team, but Victor Oladipo's out, Christian Wood is out, so right there we're getting extra minutes and usage for John Wall, and then it's just a favorable matchup because the Wizards are terrible.
So let's go to Washington, and that in mind, they're, again, very similar to Houston. A lot of good plays on this side, and as Greg said, if there's a game to stack in terms of value and the like, this is probably it. I mean, I'm looking at Bradley Beal is projected for roughly 6.5 times value by Alex, at least on DraftKings, for almost 60 fantasy points. You can look at Hachimura, who's in a great spot, almost 6x value. Same for Denny here. Neto is 5+ $3,200 for Mo Wagner. Certainly, if he starts again, he is projected for almost 7x value. Now, I don't know if he's going to start again, but based on what he did yesterday, can't imagine he's not going to. So, how many of these guys do you want to make an effort to get to, though?
Yeah, so the primary play is definitely Bradley Beal. Bradley Beal and John Wall, the two of them are going to be in a lot of my lineups together tonight. And even though things could change over the course of the day, that's something that's not going to change for me. I'm going to get a bunch of exposure to John Wall. I'm going to get a bunch of exposure to Bradley Beal because I am assuming right now that Russell Westbrook will not play. This is the tail end of a back-to-back. Russell Westbrook has not been playing in back-to-backs recently. The only thing that could change, I'll take this back. The one thing that could change with Bradley Beal is if Russell Westbrook ends up playing. Right now, I just assume that's not going to be the case based on how they've handled him in back-to-backs this year. As long as he's out, though, Bradley Beal is a great play. Raul Neto, the last time that Westbrook was out, Neto only played limited minutes. However, he was also on a minutes restriction that game. Now for this game, Neto, I don't expect him to have a minutes restriction, and Ish Smith is out. So that's going to mean that more of the minutes have to go to Raul Neto. So Neto is a really strong value play. Bradley Beal is a great pay-up option. And then, like you said, Mo Wagner started yesterday against the Celtics. He ended up having a pretty strong game. Wagner's always been a guy who's produced pretty well on a points per minute basis. He only played 22 minutes against Boston, but I'm sure it's a game that, as Kaufman's well aware of, the Celtics were not really all that competitive in. It was a game where the Celtics really got their asses kicked. Jason Tatum had one of his worst games of the season. I think he finished with like 6 points or something like that. So if that game was more competitive, I think we could have seen Wagner play more extended minutes. But since the game was so one-sided, Washington just didn't have to push their starters to play a ton.
I don't appreciate this repeated self-slander. I'm not saying any of it is wrong. I just don't appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I mean, slander, it just by definition, if I'm just saying the facts, right? It's not like I'm coming. Wouldn't it be worse if I just came out and said the Celtics played their best game of the season and still got waxed by the Wizards? Like that would be a much worse case scenario.
That is a team that has a real problem, a collection of them right now here in this pandemic, slightly shortened year. But before we go on to the next game, obviously, just I don't know. In your optimal build right now, anyway, how many guys do you think you would have from that game, just from a stacking perspective?
Like over the course of my lineups, or?
No, not how many are you getting to in general, but I don't know if you're building out a few top lineups that you really care about. How many of those guys are jumping out to you versus the other handful of games that we haven't even gotten to yet?
Yeah, I mean, if you're making a high upside GPP lineup, like you could reasonably say that you're going to have John Wall, Eric Gordon, DeMarcus Cousins, and then like Bradley Beal and Raul Neto and maybe like even Mo Wagner in the same lineup together on DraftKings. And then you hope that obviously FanDuel is a little bit different because of positional eligibility. You can't get multiple centers into the lineup. But yeah, I mean, just in terms of a DraftKings lineup, I think it's very viable to get like 6 guys from that game in there. And then you hope that the game either shoots out and goes way over the total. Maybe it goes to overtime or something like that. Because this is a game that I definitely think has a ridiculous amount of upside.
Folks, get access to all the great Awesemo Plus tools that we have been referencing and content, of course, for nearly every DFS sport out there, even NASCAR. It's true. You had Fantasy Cruncher for NASCAR yesterday, helping out a bunch of people, I imagine. You can get Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. This includes full access to all the premium content and tools on Awesemo.com, including player projections. We keep talking about those. Ownership projections, our premium Slack channel, so much more. Lineup Builder, Fantasy Cruncher, the list goes on and on. If you're only looking to play NBA, that's okay. That's available to you. Sign up now for our weekly NBA package. It is only $16.95. A lot of great offerings, a lot of great stuff. And we're going to continue to highlight it as we look at some of these other games. As I mentioned, a handful to get to in about 25 minutes to do it. So let's go to the next one, Atlanta and New York. We begin on the Hawks side, where this game is certainly not as appealing as the last one that we talked about, or even necessarily the one before that. You know, Trae Young, probably not a guy that I would get to tonight. Maybe you disagree. John Collins, I always like him. I think he's in a good spot. You could pay down. Danilo Gallinari is an option. Don't necessarily want a Clint Capella tonight. You know, Cam Reddish, probably not. So I don't know. Do you disagree with any of that?
I think on FanDuel specifically, Gallo's a decent play at 4,500, but on the whole, this is not a game that I want to look at. And the reason is because the matchup against the Knicks is not nearly as appealing as I think. Well, at this point, people are probably hip to the fact that the Knicks are a good defensive team and play at a slow pace. But in the past, it's been a positive matchup against the Knicks. It's not the case this year. The total for this game is set at 216.5. So that's the lowest total on the slate by a few points. There's actually only two games with a total under 225 for the slate, and one of them is this Knicks-Hawks game. The other one is the Clippers-Heat game that we'll talk about later. So Gallinari, just because his price point on FanDuel is worth getting to, but then you look at Trae Young and you look at some of the other guard options we've already talked about on the slate. We have Bradley Beal. When we have James Harden without Kevin Durant, there's a lot of guys that are just going to project way better than Trae Young, and it's going to make it that he's not somebody I'm going to get to in my lineups.
Keep on hitting that like up over 100. Appreciate you. On the New York side, it's really it's top heavy if you're going to get to anyone, right? It's Julius Randle, it's Nerlens Noel, and after that, it's a bunch of guys that you probably don't want to play. And Noel's a great value play, I should mention as well. About 6x value projection, $4,400 on DK, and projected for almost 30 points. Yeah,
Noel is a great play on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So the Knicks, Mitchell Robinson has a fractured hand. He underwent surgery. He's expected to be out either sometime until the end of March / early April. So Nerlens Noel is going to start at center for the Knicks in the meantime. Last game Noel started, he played 32 minutes, ended up scoring right around 25 fantasy points. So that was a decent outcome where he was priced at 4,000. I think it was on both sites. It wasn't necessarily blowing the doors off or anything like that, but still over 30 minutes for Nerlens Noel, a guy who has historically always scored right around a fantasy point per minute. Like you said, that's why that projection right around 30 fantasy points makes sense, because he's somebody who played over 30 minutes last game and has historically always averaged right around or a little over a fantasy point per minute. So we're putting him in a plus matchup against the Hawks. I think it's very reasonable to expect around 30 fantasy points for Nerlens Noel. Considering his price point, that makes him one of the top plays on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Julius Randle also benefits a little bit from Mitchell Robinson being out. He was already playing a ton of minutes earlier in the season. That's waned a little bit recently, except the Knicks don't really have any choice other than to play Julius Randle big minutes now that Mitchell Robinson's hurt. As for the guards and the wings on the Knicks, it's going to be impossible to predict. They have Alfred Payton getting minutes. They have Emmanuel Quickley, Derrick Rose, RJ Barrett, Reggie Bullock. There's so many guys in that backcourt to give minutes to that I just don't know who it's going to be on a day-to-day basis. There's better value plays on the slate. So all of them are players to avoid for me. It's Nerlens Noel is the primary option, and then Julius Randle more as a FanDuel specific play, power forward.
There is some Rose and Quickly love in the chat, some uncertainty as you highlighted as well. So I don't think anyone necessarily feels compelled. There's one person, it's not even relevant to this game, that just really wants to play Saddiq Bey tonight, even though he's not playing, just wants to show his support after so many people said to fade him yesterday. This person keeps mentioning it. I figure I'll bring attention to it.
Saddiq Bey will score less fantasy points today than did yesterday. Very confident in that.
Yes, and maybe even less than Emmanuel Quickley. How about Philadelphia and Utah here, which I think as a basketball fan is a compelling game. You got a couple of conference leaders. I don't know how interesting a fantasy game it necessarily is, but that's why I defer to you. We start with Philadelphia. I think based on the options that are out there, I'm not looking to necessarily get to a Joel Embiid or a Ben Simmons. Maybe it's Tobias Harris. Maybe, even though I hate playing him because I just never trust him, maybe a Danny Green. But how do you feel about the Sixers side of things?
Yeah, it's hard to know because Joel Embiid is questionable to play. He has a back injury. So, I mean, his status has so much weight on this game. I tend to think he's more likely to play than sit. Utah is a very tough matchup. If Joel Embiid's out, the Sixers might as well just punt the game because they're probably going to get crushed by the Jazz. The Jazz have won something like 16 of their last 17 games. And they've just been a really tough defense to score fantasy points against. So, if Joel Embiid's in, then I think it's really easy to fade the Sixers. If he's out, I still don't really like the Sixers all that much, except I would probably have a little bit of exposure to guys like Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris. Even in games where Joel Embiid's been out, the front court minutes have been kind of difficult to predict between Tony Bradley and Dwight Howard. They've started Dwight Howard in some of those games. They've started Tony Bradley in some of them. But even the guy who started hasn't been locked into big minutes. Sometimes it's been the bench guy. Sometimes it's been the starter. Sometimes they've just gone to small ball lineups and they've played Matisse Thybulle at center, or they've played what else have they done? I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I remember they played Thybulle at center. They've also played some lineups where just been like Tobias Harris plays not necessarily the five, except they've played really small lineups where it's limited both Howard and Bradley to play under 20 minutes. And it's made so that neither of them were viable options. So it looks like there's going to be enough value on the slate that even if Embiid's out, I'm not going to necessarily look at Dwight Howard or Tony Bradley as really strong value plays that they have been in the past in games that Embiid was out.
Now, on the other side for Utah, and I don't know, part of it is, do you expect a blowout? I mean, obviously, the way you look at this game now could evolve. Like you said, if Embiid doesn't play, you might think, okay, Utah's going to blow doors, and therefore some of these guys aren't as appealing. Some of these other guys who are more reserves are more appealing because someone's got to play the minutes and starters aren't going to be out there as much. But as we look at it right now, Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, Jordan Clarkson, Joe Ingles, Royce O'Neal, maybe Bojan Bogdanovic as well. You can make a case for any of these guys, but how many would you genuinely be interested in playing?
Yeah, so this is a game that is more FanDuel relevant to me than DraftKings, at least the Utah side of the game. The key here is that Mike Conley has been ruled out with a hamstring injury. They actually ruled him out in advance of this game, which is kind of nice. The other games, he's been listed as questionable all day. So on FanDuel, Jordan Clarkson is still priced at 5,500, and Joe Ingles is priced at 4,900. So on FanDuel, I think both those guys are appealing options because both of them benefit with Mike Conley out, and they just haven't been priced appropriately yet. So if you compare that to the DraftKings price of these guys, Jordan Clarkson is priced at 5,900 and Joe Ingles is priced at 5,700. So there's a price gap in the two sites between both of these players, and the FanDuel price is just much cheaper than the DK price, and it's not quite correct. So Jordan Clarkson, who I don't understand how he hasn't been priced up more on FanDuel. He's been the most popular shooting guard basically every slate since Mike Conley's been out, and they haven't really moved his price at all, and he just has played a bunch of really big games, and they haven't adjusted it enough, and that's led to him ending up in the opposite lineup a bunch of times. So Jordan Clarkson, Joe Ingles, those are guys to look at, but only FanDuel specific plays. Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell, not guys I'm looking to pay up for on this slate.
Someone says in the chat, the Atlantean maybe. Nerd Ass Greg, a 150K Friday, baby.
What's the Atlantean? I don't even know what that's a reference to.
Username.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Never mind. Yeah, I thought this was a Trae Young thing.
No. I don't know who it is, but someone that they want you to know. Maybe they're thanking you for all your wise advice and tutelage.
Well, it probably had more to do with you than me. I appreciate the thanks, except I can't take credit to anybody else's the money that they end up winning. Congratulations.
Or at least if they do, you want to cut.
No, I wouldn't do that either.
Percentage points, like an agent.
Yeah, no. Be happy, enjoy,
have fun, and keep tuning in. Cleveland and Golden State. We got a few more games to get to here. You got on the Cleveland side first, Andre Drummond, who I think more often than not is obviously a very good play. He's $7,600 on DK. He's almost 6x projected value, right around 45 fantasy points by Alex. And then you could pay down Darius Garland, who's coming off a really strong game. He's projected for 30 plus, again 5.5x value. Colin Sexton, Jared Allen, kind of between them, certainly salary wise, but also projection wise. Drummond and Garland are probably the more appealing plays to me. You could pay down for a CD Osman as well, but how do you view it?
So Andre Drummond is very similar to Marcus Cousins on this slate because I have no clue what to make of his minutes. Drummond rested in yesterday's game. He is expected to play today. I assume he's going to start. The last two games, Andre Drummond has played 16 minutes and 17 minutes. And before that, he played 36 minutes and 30 minutes. His minutes are so all over the map ever since they traded for Jared Allen that I also have no clue what to make of him on a game-to-game basis. As of right now, he's projected to be the highest owned center on FanDuel, nearly 50% ownership. That's a very high number. And on DraftKings, he's projected for much lower ownership at 12%, which makes sense because he's 7,600 on DraftKings. He's 6,500 on FanDuel. So what I'm going to do here is, number one, I'm going to pay attention to what the ownership is during the day. And then I'm also going to look to see what the starting lineup is for Cleveland as the day goes on, because I don't even know that Andre Drummond's going to start for them. They have Jared Allen in the mix. Jared Allen's played so much better than Andre Drummond since they traded for him. I think at that kind of ownership for Andre Drummond, it would be tough to fade him in cash games on FanDuel, even though there's a lot of uncertainty there. If he's going to be 80, 90% owned in cash games or something like that, then you just play him for the upside, because I think that the price point at 6,500 is too appealing. In tournaments, if this ownership holds at 43%, I'm going to have him in my player pool, but I'm going to be underweight to the field on him. I can't reasonably play somebody at nearly 50% ownership that's played 16 and 17 minutes in the last two games. So very similar with the Marcus Cousins situation. Andre Drummond could play 18 minutes again tonight. He could play 35 minutes, and there's very little rhyme or reason to how the Cavs are running their center rotation. Maybe they rest Jared Allen tonight, and that offers us a little bit more clarity on the situation because Drummond rested last night. But as it stands now, it's a really difficult one to predict minutes for.
Our dude Jordan's in the chat, our producer, telling you all to smash the like button because if you don't, I mean, he is the one here who has the power to just turn us off. He could just shut down the show. He'd just say, you know what? Meeting closing the Zoom or wherever. We're not going to do it anymore. So you should hit the like. You should do it. He's out there. He's threatening. He's got a lot of power. We can't let Jordan, wield this kind of power, Greg, but he's got it.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be the first time. I mean, he's done crazy things. Like, people don't even realize he controls my power, my internet. There's times he gets unhappy with certain plays I recommend or whatever. He just shuts off the power to my entire town. And he's like, all right, nobody. Yeah. He'd be like, okay, you didn't like Steph Curry tonight? Well, guess what? Nobody's eating in your town tonight. And he just flips the switch. So yeah, you guys better like the video, else you'll feel the wrath of producer Jordan Klein.
He's going to say, hopefully some of you guys have those dummy lineups already built, because if you're going in, from scratch, he'll just shut down the whole Awesemo site. You guys want to use all those Awesemo Plus tools? Nope. Not enough likes today, fam. Can't do it. Done. Crash. Smash that like. Getting close to 150, about 700 people watching. So the other side of this game is Golden State. And there are some appealing plays, obviously. Steph Curry, I'm not saying he's a guy you got to get in tonight, but he's always a difficult guy to fade just because, there is that 60, 70, even 80-point fantasy upside. Draymond Green, who I personally don't like playing, but he is in a good spot. I never trust Draymond Green. Andrew Wiggins, I think there's an element of that as well, just because he's not going to generally get you much more than points. And if he doesn't shoot well, then, you're kind of screwed, quite frankly. You go down to Toscano Anderson, who is obviously in a good spot right now with injuries there. Damian Lee is in a good spot. Probably wouldn't get Kelly Oubre in there, but how do you view this side?
Well, first off, I'm just happy Draymond Green's playing. Draymond Green left the Warriors last game around halftime with a knee injury, ended up coming back to play. If he was out, then we were going to have a situation where we're going to have another Eric Pascal chalk slate, and nobody wants to deal with that again. Nobody wants Eric Pascal chalk. But we could have a situation where there would have been no Draymond Green, no Kevon Looney, no James Wiseman, and it would have been Eric Pascal starting and finding a way to have another crappy game. So good thing we don't have to deal with that. Draymond, thank you for healing up. At Draymond's current price point, he's gotten to be more expensive. I don't really have interest in it. Steph Curry is somebody who I have a mild amount of interest in DraftKings at 9,900. FanDuel at 10,500. I'm not going to get to him, but on DraftKings, he's going to be in my player pool, but more as a secondary play because I prefer James Harden, I prefer Bradley Beal, and I prefer Kyrie Irving as guard options to spend up for. So there's a bunch of guys that I'm prioritizing over Steph Curry. That's happened to me on a bunch of slates this year, where there's just other guys I prefer a little bit more to Steph Curry. He's not going to be a fade to me, but not somebody I'm going to get to any more than probably 5 to 8% of lineups.
Before we move on to the next game, we've got about 10 minutes, 12 minutes left here in the show. We've got some news. Shams Charania, the Athletic, and, doesn't have a fantasy impact for tonight. Well, maybe it will, I guess, if Drummond doesn't play. The Raptors and Cavaliers are engaged in active talks on a potential Andre Drummond deal to the Raptors.
Yeah, I mean, so that actually, think about this. Andre Drummond didn't play last night, right? He rested. Andre Drummond isn't a guy who normally rests. That kind of makes me think was part of the reason he rested last night because because they knew this potential trade was going on. So let me look at the Cavs really quick because I didn't consider the potential that Andre Drummond wouldn't play again tonight. But if he's out, we could assume Jared Allen's going to start again. Jared Allen would make for a good play then. JaVale McGee, who to a lesser extent would at least be viable because JaVale McGee is a good points per minute fantasy producer, and he would probably be looking at something similar to what he played yesterday. He played how many minutes? He played 16 minutes yesterday, which isn't necessarily great, except he still scored 23 fantasy points yesterday in 16 minutes. So if we could get 20 plus fantasy points for JaVale McGee at his minimal price tag, that would make him viable. I didn't really put a lot of thought into this because I didn't consider a situation where Andre Drummond wasn't going to be playing after resting today.
Well,
after resting last
your
night.
News. Adrian Wojnarowski reporting with Brian Windhorst, Cleveland Cavaliers are no longer planning to play Andre Drummond as they work to trade the two-time All-Star.
Okay.
So that's going to update some projections, obviously, wherever you find them. And obviously, we always zero in on Alex's here at Awesemo. But, go on with the good plays tonight and get Drummond out of those builds.
Yeah. By the way, what timing? Did they know that we just finished talking about the Cavs game? And they're like, hey, guess what? Everything we talked about. Yeah, we're not going to have any
in the middle
of
the
anymore.
show. We're on that game specifically.
Yeah,
perfect.
So I'll have to put more thought into this and rework the rotation. Except Jared Allen for sure is going to be the primary guy to consider. He's going to be a chalk play now in both FanDuel and DraftKings, and one of the best power forward plays on FanDuel for sure.
All right, so get your questions in. Yeah, I mean, Brushfire saying is Jared Allen the move then? Looking like it at this moment, obviously. But stay with us, and there's a lot of great commentary coming your way and shows over the course of the day. Just to remind you, you got the tip-off a little bit later on, 4 o'clock Eastern, NBA Deeper Dive. Laffy will be along for that. That's at 5 o'clock, NBA Live Before Lock. You will have Spags and Josh at 6, Spags and EMAC with the NBA Late Slate Live Before Locks. There's you're on the tip-off obviously as well. There's a lot of great commentary and lineup building strategy that's coming your way here on Awesemo and the YouTube page and podcasts and the like over the course of the day. So a lot of great stuff could change. Jordan says, damn, I thought I was getting bought out, or he was getting bought out. You could be bought out too.
It wouldn't cost that much.
All right, let's go to the next game here as we got about 10 minutes to work with. The Heat and Clippers. Now, on Miami first, there's not a lot here, I don't think. I mean, it's Jimmy Butler, obviously the guy that you want to consider. I don't think it's a great spot for Bam Adebayo necessarily, or Tyler Hero, Kendrick Nunn, Kelly Olynyk, DeMarcus Robinson. Or Duncan Robinson, pardon me, DeMarcus Robinson. Duncan Robinson, you just keep on going down. But it's really, Jimmy Butler or bust on that side for me.
Yeah, and so here's the deal with Jimmy Butler. He is a slightly more favorable play on DraftKings than FanDuel, 8,200 on DK, 8,900 on FanDuel. How viable he is depends on the status of Kawhi Leonard and Paul George for me, because if both those guys are out, this becomes a way easier matchup than it would normally be for Jimmy Butler going up against the Clippers. If both of them play, then I don't really have much interest in Jimmy Butler. But the 8,200 price tag, at least on DraftKings, it assumes that he's in a difficult matchup against the Clippers and is playing against one of the two stronger perimeter defenders in the league in Kawhi and Paul George. If those guys are out, this is no longer a tough matchup for Jimmy Butler. So this is, and we're going to have to talk about this when we get to the Clippers side in a minute also. The status of Butler is going to depend on the status of Kawhi and Paul George.
All right, so let's go to the Clippers side. And as things stand right now, I mean, obviously you've got Leonard projected to play. George is not currently projected to play, but things can change in a hurry. Kawhi not in a great spot. Serge Ibaka is really the only one Alex has here anyway as a good value opportunity. Maybe Nick Batum as well, but naturally, as you've noted, I've noted, we've said 1,000 times on this show in general, pay attention to who gets, ruled in, ruled out, because that just opens up all sorts of value. And maybe you get another, Lou Williams chalk day with what he did yesterday. But who stands out for you for the Clips, just as based on what you know right now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know nothing right now. We got two of the best players in the league we've no clue what their status is. Kawhi was unexpectedly ruled out for last night's game. I tend to agree with what some people in the chat were saying earlier. I think Kawhi is probably more likely to play today than not. I don't really think this is a serious injury. Even though we don't have information on it, I think this was a back-to-back situation. Played against the Cavs yesterday. It was a game the Clippers knew they could win with or without Kawhi Leonard. So hey, let's try to ease him on a back-to-back. We have a tougher game tomorrow against the Heat. So they sat Kawhi yesterday. Paul George, it's hard to know just because we don't have an updated injury report on him yet. And then last night before the game, when Ty Lue was asked what's an updated status on Paul George, he said, I've been fixated on the health of Kawhi Leonard. I haven't even checked in on Paul George, so I don't know. So that has me thinking he's questionable to play tonight. Maybe he sits, maybe he plays. I don't know. But we need more information here. Like you said, if both of them are out, we could see another Lou Williams night. He was really good last night at 30 points and 10 assists. Carried a really big usage rate. Also had the ball in his hands a ton without Kawhi and Paul George out there. So he would be somebody to look at. Nick Batum as well. He didn't play well yesterday, except in general, I think we could expect an increased role for him when there's no Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. So yeah, we just need to see what the injury report is and who's in or out.
Got to tell you, before we go to our last game, the Nets and Kings, the amount of disrespect for Andre Drummond in the chat right now is just off the charts. I mean, I'm not saying the guy's worth his salary. He's not. I'm actually a little bit surprised that Cleveland's even able to unload it. And I'll be curious to see what that deal looks like if, in fact, he goes to the Raptors or somewhere else. But it's not like the guy sucks.
Oh, he does. He sucks.
I don't think he does.
He does.
He's hollow stats for him.
Yeah. So Andre Drummond. There's also. Do you remember what Andre Drummond got traded for last year?
I don't.
Nothing. Like he got traded for. It might have been a second round pick. It might not have even been that. It might have just been dead contracts to just take him because teams were terrified that he was going to end up opting into his contract. If the Raptors trade for him, I would be shocked if they give up anything of value for Andre Drummond because he doesn't have value.
Well, like I said, that's more about his contract and less about the player. I mean,
no,
he's nowhere near worth what his contract is. I'm not saying that.
It's also about the player though, because he plays an outdated position. In
today's NBA, yes.
He plays number one, he can't shoot, so he doesn't stretch the court. And then the other issue too is that he's not a good defensive player. So there's kind of this thought that he's a good defensive player because of his block and rebound stats. But all right, so I have his on off court numbers up right here.
Mm-hmm.
The Cavaliers allow 3.7 less points per 100 possessions when Andre Drummond is off the court. The other thing also to consider is they have Jared Allen, who's a much better player, in my opinion, than Andre Drummond. So it's not to say that Drummond doesn't belong on an NBA roster, except he's just kind of okay. Like he's a rotation player. And I think there was a point when he was thought of as a guy who's kind of a building piece of a team, except it was when he played a position and a certain style of game that was valued more heavily than it is now.
Sure.
And he's somebody who he's capable of blocking shots and steals, but there's nobody with a bigger gap between their fantasy value and actual life value to a team than Andre Drummond, because he's a very valuable fantasy asset. But then you look at some of the numbers for the Cavaliers with him off the court, and it's like, well, they're better when he's not playing, and the Cavaliers already suck as a team. So I just don't think he provides much value to a team that's actually looking to win games at this point.
Yeah, I am King Sosa says a person that can get you 20 and 20 does not suck. He said it's more about contract and fit. It's not entirely the player. Let's see. Brandon says, I agree with Adam. His contract is crazy large. If he made 10 million with his skill set and production, he'd be much more respected. Michael, he doesn't suck. He's not an all-star, but he can contribute. Then, you've got some other people obviously on the other side, including even some saying trade him for a washing machine.
Yeah, which that might be too much for him. Let's see what the Raptors actually give up for him, because I mean, last year he got traded for basically nothing.
Yeah, I'd have to pull up exactly what it was. But let's go to our last game here. And before we do, I want to remind you, stay up to date. And, couldn't be more relevant, it feels like, based on just some of the stuff we've been talking about here in this hour. Normally, we always know every single day news is going to change over the course of the day and be prepared for it. Very rarely does stuff start to happen during the 10 o'clock Eastern hour. But here we are, finding out that Drummond likely not going to play and what value Jaren Allen and the like is going to come up in Cleveland. Never mind all these guys that are questionable as things stand right now. Stay up to date on the latest NBA DFS news with our Awesemo NBA Twitter handle. Okay, Awesemo NBA. Our guy News God, who is hanging out here in the chat as he always does, will be delivering the latest on injuries, starting lineups, minutes limits, and more daily before lock. Make sure give Awesemo NBA a follow. Also, check out News God's Twitter handle. That is NewsGod, NEWZ, God_DFS. Catch Ship My Money's deep dive article. It's free this season to prepare you for the slate, and it's a must read if you are playing NBA DFS tonight. I hope for Adam's sake he has not started writing that yet, at least for some of these games, because a lot is going to change. Let's go over to what I always think is an interesting team to talk about. That is Brooklyn, Sacramento on the other side. But first here for the Nets, no Kevin Durant. So you got James Harden, Kyrie Irving, even DeAndre Jordan, all in great spots. How many of them would you like to get to?
Yeah, so I mean, there's no Kevin Durant. He's dealing with the hamstring injury, talked about a little bit earlier. It's not that hard to figure out here. James Harden's going to play a big role. Kyrie Irving's going to play a big role. Both of them are primary plays. Both of them are strong plays for tournaments, strong plays for cash games. DeAndre Jordan is also somebody who draws interest for me for a couple of reasons. Number one, they have less options to play small ball lineups without Kevin Durant in there. They've played a bunch of lineups with Kevin Durant at center this year. That's no longer an option. The other thing, too, is with the Nets struggling on defense, they made a little bit of a change to the rotation last game or 2 games ago because DeAndre Jordan missed last game due to personal reasons. But the last time we saw him play against the Pacers, Jordan played 37 minutes, and it was also by far the Nets' best defensive effort of the season. They only ended up allowing 94 points to the Pacers. And something we've seen over the last week or so, where Steve Nash has said we need more of DeAndre Jordan from a defensive standpoint. The Nets have been a disaster on defense for a lot of the season. And I don't think DeAndre Jordan is anywhere near the player he used to be. But still, if you look at this roster and the other options they have at center, for them to be even below average on defense, just to avoid being a total void on the defensive end of the court, they need to get something out of DeAndre Jordan. So I think we look at the 36 minutes he played the last game he was active. I don't expect that to happen, except there's at least a ceiling for minutes that makes me want to get him into lineups.
Got more than 700 people watching, folks. Smash that like almost to 200. Get us to 200 before we get out of here. So what else on this Brooklyn side, or is it just top heavy for you?
Yeah, it's just top heavy. I mean, still, even with Kevin Durant out, so much of the usage goes to James Harden and Kyrie Irving. I mean, when all 3 of them are there, that's basically where all the production comes from. But with him out still, Kyrie Irving and James Harden are high enough usage players that the 2 of them are going to soak up a lot of the production. So in terms of usage, I expect almost all of it to go to James Harden and Kyrie Irving. That's going to take away most of the ancillary players out of the mix other than DeAndre Jordan, just because he doesn't need usage to put up fantasy points. He's going to pull down rebounds. He's going to block some shots, and his price is relatively cheap on FanDuel and DraftKings. So DeAndre Jordan is the role player that I'm willing to get to, and then nobody else really as of now.
A lot of Drummond jokes. A lot of Drummond jokes in the chat, and now there's Blake Griffin jokes. People are just having themselves a time with washed former NBA stars. All right, so for Sacramento, De'Aaron Fox, Marvin Bagley Jr., probably most appealing options, at least to me, as opposed to, say, Harrison Barnes, a Buddy Hield, Halliburton, Rashawn Holmes. For me, it's more Fox and Bagley. What about you?
I have mild interest in De'Aaron Fox just because of the matchup. However, he's also been priced up quite a bit on FanDuel and DraftKings. He's 8,900 on DK, and then on FanDuel, he's 8,700. So I have him projected pretty well. However, once again, it's still the issue of we have James Harden to pay up for. We have Kyrie Irving. We have Bradley Beal. So there's all these other options that De'Aaron Fox is somebody who's kind of more just a correlation play. If you have a lineup with Kyrie Irving and or James Harden, you throw De'Aaron Fox in there and you hope like, hey, if this game shoots out, if it's really high scoring, you have to expect a lot of that production to come from De'Aaron Fox from the Kings side. But just in terms of a points per dollar perspective, he's not somebody that I could prioritize highly on this slate, given all of the other strong pay up options. So De'Aaron Fox, somebody who I'm probably going to end up with in, like 5 to 10% of lineups, but not somebody I'm going to go out of my way to jam into there either.
Anyone else on that side?
No, we do have, I know you mentioned him, Marvin Bagley's questionable to play with a calf injury. If he's out, Then we're going to see some extra minutes go to probably Rashawn Holmes. He played reasonably well yesterday. Hassan Whiteside could enter the rotation, but still not guys that are going to be priority options for me. And then guys like Harrison Barnes, Buddy Hield, those are guys that are already priced up right now.
Dom in the chat is challenging you to a heads up, and El Negro Loco is offering to stake him.
Okay.
In, huh?
Sure.
Just to give you the final, I looked it up. I was curious. The Andre Drummond trade taking place just 1 year ago, almost to the day, year and a week. So Drummond from the Pistons to the Cavs for John Henson, Brandon Knight, and a 2023 second round pick.
All right. Well, there we go. That's the market value for Andre Drummond.
It might be less now, actually.
It could be less, but at least as of a year ago, and it only takes one dumb team to make an offer. But as of last year, they scoured the market. They took calls from everybody. That was the best offer available for Andre Drummond. They could get, and by the way, John Henson hasn't really played since. He played scarce minutes for the Cavs last year, for the Cavs and the Pistons last year. Knight, I'm almost positive, hasn't played at all this year. And the second round pick in 2020, it's probably even a protected second round pick for all we know about what that is. Like the trade value for Andre Drummond is actually nothing.
Yeah, it's the 2023 second round pick, least favorable of Cleveland's and Golden State's 2023 second round picks. So there you go.
It's nothing.
Yeah. So before we go then, is there, I don't know, let's just project ahead. Let's say he goes to Toronto, and I'm not even talking fantasy. I'm talking actual basketball. Do you like him there? If you're the Raptors, and even if they don't give up much for him, I don't know, let's say it's like Aaron Baines and a pick or something like that. The money has to work too. So I'm not going to pretend that, I've got these two salary cap charts in front of me. So whatever, they don't give up much, clearly. How much does he help that team in actuality, more than on paper as a fantasy performer? How much does he help that team on the floor, or doesn't he? Because this is still a Toronto team. It's not Kawhi's Raptors, but this is still a team that, has aspirations to be a contender in the East.
Yeah. So I don't think he would help them really much at all. I mean, it helps because he's an above replacement level player, and the Raptors are thin in the front court. So I'm not going to pretend that he's so bad that he has no utility for them. But number one, it depends what they give up. Number two, though, I still expect their best lineups are probably going to be with Pascal Siakam at center. Like, I think the best lineup for the Raptors, and by the way, also, I think Chris Boucher is a much better player than Andre Drummond. They're really struggling to get minutes for Chris Boucher, especially the more I think about it. No, I don't think he helps them at all. I'd rather just play Chris Boucher more minutes.
All right. Well, something to think about, and who knows? I mean, by the time that the shows later on today roll around, we could have a trade consummated and more to talk about, and certainly he'll be out of the projections, and you can look at some of the better fantasy options. So final words here, just big overview. Who are some of your, be it high-priced or value plays as things stand right now, knowing full well hours more before things change, but right now, who are some of your favorite plays tonight?
So Jared Allen, who, I mean, when we talked about the Cavs, he wasn't even consideration at that point, really, but now Andre Drummond not expected to play. So Jared Allen for sure, Bradley Beal and John Wall, both of them, Mo Wagner, assuming that he starts again for Washington. And then one other player, James Harden, who I didn't mention.
You mentioned Harden earlier.
Yeah, James Harden with no Kevin Durant.
Okay, well, coming up the rest of the day, folks, you'll get a little bit of a reprieve here, but in a few hours, a little less than that, 2 Eastern, it is the PGA DFS First Look Show with Jason and Jeff. Then at 3 o'clock, NHL Strategy Show, it's Jake and Terry. The tip-off will come around at 4 o'clock. Greg will be back for that with Eric, and that will take you until 5, right into the NBA Deeper Dive with Laffy and Adam. Then it's Spags and Josh for NBA Live Before Lock. And then, of course, later on, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, you get the NBA Late Slate Live Before Lock with Spags and Emax. So there's a ton coming up over the rest of this day here on the Awesemo YouTube page, the podcast as well. So make sure you check them all out. And again, monitor the Awesemo NBA Twitter feed, NewsGod _DFS, and just Adam ship my money, the Adam's Deep Dive article. You got a whole lot of great stuff coming at you over the course of the day here, and a lot is going to change, clearly. It's not just Drummond, a lot of guys getting ruled in, ruled out, and so on and so forth. So, Greg, pleasure, buddy. Always fun.
See you again at this time next week, Kaufman.
Look forward to it. I'll see you guys again on Thursday. Thanks to Jordan. Thanks for not shutting us down. We appreciate you, buddy.